It's a good time actually that I'm here right now. I'm right in the middle of a book, a new book called Collaborative Creativity, The Educational Imperative. It's a short title. I have to put all the keywords in as usual. Once the full title is done, it goes to a publisher, but I'm immersed in the stuff right now, and I'm immersed in conversations because the way I do the books now, getting a multi-authored book, like an edited book, is very difficult in Canada now because of the fair dealing stuff. And the way I got around it is I write the chapters for the book, and I invite people that will augment the text from around the globe, and I just do Zoom interview conversations with them, get them transcribed, then we co-write it into a piece, right? So I've had a lot of these conversations with different people, so we're a bit charged. So let me frame a bit of this. So I'm thinking back to, I'm first of all trained as an educator. I was trained as an elementary educator. I think I've taught every grade except kindergarten. So right now I teach grad students, like a lot of you do here, teach undergrads, whatever, and I was a student. And what kind of student was I? Well, I mean, I never wrote an exam in high school. I never had to write an exam in high school because if you got a certain percentage, I'm not from Alberta, by the way. Just want to make that clear right now. So, sorry. I grew up in this small town, pulp and paper town in Northern Ontario, which is why I have an affinity with several towns in British Columbia. So when I go to Port Alberni, I used to be able to, and it's just by smell. Because I grew up in that, and I've worked in all those departments, and I know, and my father worked in that, so did my brother, and that's how I got through school. So I'm thinking about, what I want to talk about today is educational transformation. I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing as educators? Like, what do we actually do? And what do we actually have our students do when they come through our doors? From learning experience design to assessment design, all that kind of stuff. And we got to shake that right down. Shake it right down. I'm lucky I've got a lab. I have a lab. My grad program is going into its 8th cohort. And it's very much participatory action research that we do, okay? And I'll talk about it in bits and pieces as I go through in the next hour. And I'm thinking about my own education, what I learned to do and how I learned to get through a system. So when I grew up in Ontario, our high schools were grade 9 to 13 at that time, right? Grade 9, we wrote a provincial achievement exam, okay? So I wrote an exam. A month later, the results come back to the school. I'm in a small little hick town. Like, you know, the kind of town where a July 1st parade is a fire truck and 6 Camaros. Anybody from a place like that? Somebody came up to us and said, we had Trans Ams. Why are you telling me that? I want to know that. Anyways, so the results come back. Principal calls 3 of us down to the office. Guess what? 3 of you finished in the 90-some percentile in the province of Ontario. You know what my first question was? Because does it count on my average? I didn't know what a percentile was. That's how stupid I was. And I said, no, you beat, I was 90, I was the lowest of the 3. You beat 90% of the people in this province on this achievement test. I said, well, what good is it? What good was writing that exam test for? I said, it doesn't count for anything. So why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? So I walked out of that and said, well, that's kind of dumb. I went home that day. My mom, both my parents have passed away in the last several years, but my mom went as far as grade 11. My dad had grade 9, right? A typical World War II veteran, came back and drove truck and worked at the mill, that kind of thing. My mother goes, how's school today? I said, I got 90 in some tests, but didn't count for anything. If she had found out what it was, she would have freaked out, right? Whatever. Anyways, fast forward, grade 12. Grade 12. We do another achievement exam. By that time, I was jaded. I knew what the system was. It was so predictable. It was all about outcomes known. All about recall and outcomes known. I could do that really, really well. You know, a lot of us can do that really, really well. And I knew what it was about. The stuff was interesting. I knew it was. I had to know discipline content. You have to have discipline content to be creative. I'll get into that, whatever. But we have a system that's such a preponderance of discipline competency acquisition at the expense of dispositional development. Okay, and that's when we'll get to collaborative creativity. So that exam, I answered it in a pattern, in a zigzag pattern. A, B, C, D, E, D, C, B, A. You know, it took me longer to do that than if I had answered the questions, right? I think I finished in the 16th percentile. I thought that was really neat. I thought I'd beat 16% of the people in Ontario on a zigzag. And no one called me into the office. Called me into the office for that, to congratulate me. You know, no one said, what happened to this kid? What happened to him? Dissociated. completely emotionally disconnected, except for one or two teachers that were really interesting, that really went out of their way to make the learning experience relevant to me or whatever, that kind of stuff. And so now, fast forward, I'm teaching my very first month in a grade 7 classroom, social studies, okay? Principal says, Robert, you're getting evaluated by the district superintendent next Tuesday. And that's really nerve-wracking for a young educator when you're being evaluated, right? So you know what I did? I wanted to find out what was on the test, because that's all I'd ever done. Outcome known. So I went to the staff room, asked my experienced colleagues, goes, what's the superintendent looking for? Oh, he loves class participation. If you can show your students of having their hands up and stuff like that, because you'll get a good evaluation. Oh, I can do that, because it was my homeroom he was coming into. I had them 15 minutes before he came into my class. Then I had a grade 7 social studies class. So before he came in, here's what I did. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I forget his name. He was coming in to inspect me. I told him what was happening. I said, if he loves class participation, I said, every time I ask a question, I want everybody to put their hand up. I said, if you know the right answer, put your left hand up. If you don't know the right answer, put your right hand up. True story. He came in. He sits in the back, his little notebook, and I asked the question, and all the hands go up. It was actually really funny. How could you not know it was rigged, right? And I know who knew the answers, right? So I said, and I did 2 wrong, then a right. So I had a pattern. I was going, oh, I hope he doesn't figure out the pattern, the code. No, my report said, great class participation. So we know that, outcome known, right? Let's talk about collaborative creativity. So let's get our terms straight. We use that term creativity, innovation, all these things become synonyms for each other. They become blurred, right? And design thinking, throw all that in the mix. They're all good things. Just got to make sure we're precise in how we use it. My last new book is a chapter on that. I go through all the terms, and I'll take a stand. People say, you can't define creativity. Well, you can. I use Todd Lubart's definition, and then I augment it with Plucker's definition, and they're psychologists, so there's the DNA. Guess what? They're psychologists. They're the psychometrics, and that's where it comes from. But I'm creating a lens for educational application. That's my bias, okay? You have a variety of disciplines here, and you have to contextualize this kind of stuff. So I use a very simple definition: sequence of thoughts and action that leads to novel adaptive production. Thought, action, and then there's production. Something's produced. I mean, read Keith Sawyer. If we don't produce anything, then creativity researchers wouldn't have anything to research. And you go back to the etymology of the word creare, I mean, it's to make. You make something from it, right? And it's not thinking about it. It's imagination. So creative thinking is a term that bugs me a bit. Well, watch this. Critical thinking? Oh, this is so good. I have no drama background. I am right now going to do my portrayal of somebody engaged in critical thinking. Watch. There. Did you see it? I was critically thinking about something. Creative thinking, too. Like that. Wait. Oh, how about this one? Using my imagination. Do you ever do that when you're a little kid in school and the teacher would go, okay, use your imaginations, and you would go, it looked like you had to go to the bathroom, right? You had to look like you were doing something. So, and then with this book, when I do the collaborative piece, defining collaboration and cooperation are blurred. So incredibly, right? What is true collaboration? And for this book, I've got Peter Glura from MIT, from the Center for Collective Intelligence. He's written the book on stuff on coins, collaborative innovation networks, and that's what we use in my graduate program, that kind of concept when people are working together. They have to build a coin around themselves. Otherwise, the 3 of them will sit in a group trying to do some social innovation. I'm going, why are you limiting your ideas to the 3 of you? So we make them develop one, and then to get through to amplify the prototyping process and stuff like that. So when we get this ambiguity, it can be real problematic. And I got one little word ambiguity story that I've got to share because I think it's really funny. A friend of mine's a grade 1 teacher where I live. I live in Cochrane, just west of Calgary. And she's a grade 1 teacher. She took her class not long ago to the local swimming pool. The grade 1 boys go in the boys' change room, girls go in the girls' change room. She's outside talking to the parents, right? One little boy comes out and says, Miss S, can you come in and help Brent change? He's having trouble getting his bathing suit on. So she says, okay, go back in. Goes, I'll be in a few minutes to help out. So she goes to the boys' change room door, knocks on the door, and opens it a bit and goes, "Okay, boys, cover up, I'm coming in." And she walks in, there's 14 boys stark naked sitting there like this. So we need the clarity when it comes to, when I first started this, I have 2 research assistants, and I said, okay, we're sitting in a restaurant, and I said, we need to clarify, differentiate between cooperation and collaboration. Right away, one of them went to their phone, Googled them. You know what, definitions are almost identical. Says that's not enough, you gotta be able to differentiate it. So when I marry collaboration with creativity, now there's a means to, I want to talk about empowering people, right? So what have we done? What is the, and think about, read Mintzberg's stuff from 1979 on organizational structures. I mean, really, educational institutions are fundamentally machine bureaucracies. They're about standardization. Yet, we are, generally an instructor, professional bureaucracy, I guess, lack of a better word. You have a wide range of contingencies, and you maybe get a chance to invent really widely, depending on what kind of environment you're in, or that may be really restrictive. I addressed all of the Alberta education managers for K-12 people in Edmonton about 2 years ago. They wanted me to talk about the new creativity competency and the new curriculum initiative, right? And I said when I got into a working group, I said, should we not be designing this for over the horizon? Really forward-thinking kind of curriculum in this area. The answer I got back from the leader of that area was, no, this side of the horizon, because we'll have implementation problems. Now I understand that they'll get pushed back from voters. My answer was, why don't we come up with design an innovative implementation strategy? Why don't we design it forward, and then why are we constantly, so we're getting our wings clipped because of the standardization juggernaut everywhere, those constraints, right? And then we acquiesce to that dominant structure, and then what happens is, I think as we have students come up, I'll show you a kind of graphic that I have later on, where I think what we've done is to develop generation after generation of passive consumers. Passive consumers. And then in the 2012 book, Educating for Creativity, A Global Conversation, I looked at schools all over the planet from early childhood to post-secondary that focused on creativity and that kind of stuff as a primary rationale, right? A lot of these high schools, whatever, initiatives came about because students had disengaged. Well, why did they disengage to begin with? Why did they dissociate? And I always say to my students, I can tell right away. Boy, and if it happens to me, then it's my bad as an instructor. I mean, I always say, are you on a good date or are you on a bad date? You ever see people on a bad date? Study their body language. Look at them. How they walk, how they talk to each other, how they touch, how they whatever, just their body language the whole bit. You know, you can tell the student's not connected with their work when they bring the work to you. They bring the work to you and they, oh, here, we did this, and you can tell where they have an emotional distance and they haven't really bought it. You know why? Because they are constantly in extrinsic motivation mode. They're waiting for a prompt externally to do something. And one of the big transitions we have to deliberately move to in education is the move to intrinsic motivation. Not by a lucky strike, but we got a topic everybody liked. There's got to be a deliberate move. But how do we move ownership over to that? So I want to get into this thing. What do we do as educators? What are we doing? What are you doing as a learner, as an educator? Are you an agent of change? And I'll get into the principle of perpetual change and adaptation. Are you an agent of change? If you're an agent of change, what are you an agent of? So we have a rapid social, cultural, economic, technological, rapid change backdrop. Why would educational practice and learning practice would it not change rapidly to adapt? And the complexities are getting greater and greater and greater compared to decades ago or whatever, right? As we have this massive knowledge and whatever, you can't do stuff on your own. Well, we could. It's way easier if we recruit people all over the planet who are experts and mobilize knowledge bases for synthesis, right? But we've come to commodify knowledge, to become territorial, to mistrust all those things that are counterintuitive of a competitive vertical hierarchy thing where assessment is vertical comparison. And the only people who are validated are the people at the top of that pyramid. So if you don't get an A, if you're at the top, all these people who are totally normal kids, people peel off from the system and develop a social valuation because, hey, I wasn't compliant, I wasn't cooperative, And I wasn't able to comply to that system. Now, don't get me wrong, we need to know those nuts and bolts of discipline, but it's only a small part of the equation as to what I think education should be doing. And the part of the thing is, I'm in that system. I'm in that standardization system. And then we assume the negative characteristics of that system, whether we realize it or not. And I constantly have to check and reframe, and I use the word resocialization a lot with my own grad students in my own grad program. So are you an agent of change, or are you a victim of the anesthesia of conditioning? That we just do things because it's the way it's been done. Just mindlessly accept it. Oh yeah, well, we have to grade this way. We have to grade like that. We have to do this. Students come into my program, Collaborative Creativity and Design Thinking for Innovation. You know what their first assignment is? Last year, I had 28 in the cohort. I have the first course is face-to-face 5 days in July. And then the second course, it's Introduction to Collaborative Culture, Creative Culture. Second course is Social Innovation, Human-Centered Design and Entrepreneurship, where they have a year-long thing where they do a design brief, and the social innovation has to land as a real prototype in real time, in a real context, in 10 months later. So last year at this time, I'll be doing it with this group on Monday when I get back. I contacted each one of them. I said, each of you brings 5 cardboard boxes, 3 newspapers, a roll of string, a roll of duct tape, and a box cutter knife to the first day of classes. I said, you have 4 weeks to prepare before you arrive. When you're on campus, you have 5 afternoons to do this task. You're to build a life-size female humpback whale. Anatomically correct, no flat surfaces, right? Freestanding. Adult female humpback whale is 60 feet long in the Taylor Institute, in that foyer. And I said, if it fails, I said, now, I've never done this big with a class before, so it might fail. I'm going to push you into 2 discussion groups for the 4 weeks prior to your arrival. One is whale data and design ideas. The whale data is out there, by the way. All the measurements you want, all the proportions. These aren't artists, by the way. These are just early childhood to post-secondary educators, people from industry and all that. They're all in one room, right? So, so whale data and design ideas. And then the next one was collaborative tactics and strategies. And I gave them a metacognitive kind of rubric. How are you going to care for each other? How are you going to solve conflicts? How are you going to make sure everybody, all 28 people, have meaningful roles for the duration of this project? All those kinds of questions, right? And they had to resolve those before they arrived. And I wasn't sure they're going to pull it off. I'm experimenting. You know why? Because I'm not going to ask them to do something I wouldn't do. So we have to embody that. It's nothing worse than being counterintuitive in front of your students. Nothing worse. They go, well, why are you asking us to design? You don't experiment, you don't do that. And they said, are we guinea pigs? I said, yeah, it's my lab. It might not work, but it's going to be worth it educationally, even if it fails. Because we'll find out about the communication breakdown or what happened, why did it fail, what's really great to deconstruct, right? 4 afternoons, Thursday, 6 o'clock of the first week, there was a life-size female humpback whale, proportionally correct, all built out of newspaper or whatever. It was really well done. I was surprised. You know, that night, 2 in the morning on the security cameras, it fell over. You know the mistake I made? I didn't realize how wide the girth was on that thing. I was going by length, right? It was 12 feet. It actually was dangerous for people up on ladders and scaffolds doing this thing. It was kind of dumb when I thought after the fact. But this year they're doing a giant lobster. I have 5 students from Nova Scotia. They were ecstatic. I think, okay, it's 30 feet long anyways, but it's lower, 6.5 feet. But the idea is something they haven't done before, right? Go back to here. So anyways, I use that to establish interactivity because I didn't intervene, by the way. They had 3 groups came in. They all had different construction, design thing, and I didn't resolve it. You know, you're 28, you resolve. Here's just look at that metacognitive rubric. I want to address all that. It was pretty interesting how they went from extrinsic to intrinsic, and it's interesting. I have had different groups, and we had stereotypical people evolve. You know, you have in your groups. I call them hitchhikers, cheerleaders, you know, ghosts, people who try to be invisible, magpies. They go to the the best. Somebody just flows to all the successful people. They don't do anything, and then I'll maybe get a chance to talk about that. Here's the transformational dynamics that I think I'm going to go through a whole bunch that I think are really informing where education should go. okay? It's very, very difficult because the inertia of the machine bureaucracy is tremendous. And I think you probably have more, I'm as an outsider, more place-based than a lot of institutions have in Canada. Just because of the way you're set up or whatever, to design and really experiment and do stuff that'll be really, really interesting for and engaging and meaningful for learners. And some of this stuff, I'll tell you where they came from. I can give you the DNA if you email me. I got them from Think Amsterdam, Kareem Benamar, Think Creative Leadership in Amsterdam. Other stuff comes from KnowledgeWorks in the US, Institute for the Future, which is something of the RAND Corporation. And then the stuff on social Gaji is from Ann Savari. She's in the Bay Area consultant. She writes for the IFTF, and she's in my new book. She's got a feature piece in that as well. And so the big one, consume to create. I mean, really, why would I have to come to school just to consume data? I mean, think about it. I mean, you know about reverse classrooms and stuff like that. Why do I have to come, like even this? I could have taped myself, I should have, or whatever, but yeah, so this is counterintuitive, right? It's one of those things. But you know what the neat thing is? I'll admit openly I'm a hypocrite. That way I don't need counseling for it, right? That's what you have to do, right? So consume to create's the big one. Consume to create, huge transition. Why? So when you get good at what you do, okay? So if all I practice as a learner is consuming data, that's what I get good at, okay? I'm a passive consumer of data, and I get to restate it and memorize it, restate it, and in neat ways, I analyze it and use it and apply it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. I'm just talking about proportionate allocation, right? Because I really believe that we have to spend way more time on dispositional development. And I said that to Alberta Education. I said, I think creative development is as important as literacy and numeracy development. I had somebody in the back row, one of the managers, roll their eyes when I said that. And I said, well, listen, why would you equip somebody with knowledge, all the knowledge in the world about something, and don't give them a disposition to be able to use it collaboratively to innovate for the benefit of other people? What's the purpose of that? I opened in Paris at the OECD meetings in last September, their kickoff meeting for their post-secondary initiative on creativity and critical thinking in higher education and teacher education. And I did the creativity piece. Somebody from the University of Bucharest did the critical thinking piece. The very first thing I said, and it's a room full of 25 countries, 45 universities in this room. I said, don't assume that if you're an expert in a field that you have a high creative capacity. Don't assume that. You can't assume that. Unless you have certain attributes that you have, that you've been imbued with, maybe from experience, from work experience, from whatever. But that's not engendered in learners in a machine that's really skewed towards consumption. They learn how to consume, and they learn the rules of that, and then they end up being like me, putting your left hand up, putting your right hand up, right? So it becomes it's a very passive system, by and large passive. And again, these are generalized characteristics. So consume to create is, they want to go to actively engaging. I mean, it's a form of validation when I have somebody and that can be at any grade. I don't have to have all the discipline knowledge in the world to be creative. I can have a little bit and create on that level. It's kind of this Gestalt sort of approach, right? And so anyways, passive to interactive, it's highly interactive. How can you have somebody in an educational environment beside somebody for a semester, even in the ether or physically, and not have a meaningful conversation with each other? That's just a crime. That shouldn't happen, right? And that's because it's authoritative, whatever. It's a very different kind of thing, and it shouldn't be that way. So we're looking at these shifts: passive to interactive, authoritative to empowering, didactic to dialogic, highly dialogic. I'm going to get into assessment in a big way at the end of this. Totally dialogic. I use only co-formative assessments. Students write reams of stuff for their assessments, but it's all a conversation between the two of us. You know, and I'll clarify that as I go along. Push to pull was that work and whatever. Outcomes known to outcomes unknown. Okay, we have to have disciplined content, but we've got to move into a space where students are dealing with outcomes unknown, and they can discover. And that's why I have a need to collaborate, where they get to ask questions. Otherwise, I have students come in for the first day of grad classes, and I'm thinking, what's your passion area? They're defining passion areas by what they consume. No, what are you passionate? What are you passionate about? What are your dreams? What do you want to do going forward? And they have to do a couple of projects in my class where they create original work, where they haven't created anything in their lives before, and that kind of thing. Now when I use the word creativity, the degree of originality, by the way, is this. I use a double track definition. One is creative. Now, people, professionals in the field here would be compared to their peers. So if you wrote an article or wrote a book, it would be compared to the field that you work in, right? A young learner, undergraduate student, I would be comparing their work probably to their previous creative output. So you go from an individualistic definition of originality to a social cultural one. There's a transition as their work gains a sophistication. Now what happens is we often just assume that's going to happen, that it's going to happen. We don't deliberately take the pedagogical steps or sociological steps to make that happen, as students have said. So here are the transitions that would happen. We would go from outcomes known to outcomes unknown through emergent design, okay? Machine bureaucracy to adhocracy. I mean, it starts off with structure, it's okay. Again, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're stretching the dynamic. You're stretching the continuum, right? To include student-initiated invention, a space for them to invent, and to initiate and to drive and to grow those collaborative innovation networks and stuff like that. And extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. Nothing better when you have a student who's intrinsically motivated, just driven. If you're an educator, and nothing better if you're a student, if you're so excited about something, you would walk through fire for it. You own it because you own it. Nothing worse when you're an instructor and a student comes up to you and uses this language. I got this on your exam. Your exam. You gave me a B. You gave me an A minus. Yeah, I took your course last year. I mean, why wasn't it your course? That's just dissociation. Those are little clues, right? Students, they dissociate. No, they touch. They didn't have any an emotional investment. Bad date, okay? So now you go further on to assets to access. I mean, really. So I did a thing at Okanagan School of Business last year. Yeah, it was interesting, boy, watching. You know, like typically, and I did the keynote the first day, and the next day I sat around and watched all the sessions that the faculty gave, and one of them was on assessment. And it was really well done, too. Talked about I was amazed at the cheat devices some of the students use for the exams. You know, high tech, it's really getting good, you know, that kind of thing. And I thought I knew all of them because I used all of them, okay, at one time. Or my friends did, not me. I would never do that. And then I thought, we got into groups, I'm thinking, why would you put something in an exam that I could Google the answer to? Why would that even be in an exam? I can get that stuff anytime. I can do it right now on my phone, grab that stuff. So, and then we got into, I thought, then they came out, they presented their code of ethics for faculty and students for exams. And I listened to it, so the next day when I spoke, I said, do you realize I could have been the head of a penitentiary talking to my staff, and that code of ethics would have applied. I said, you're on the wrong side of the fence with your students. So here you have all these experts, incredible expertise in the room, and now I'm in an adversarial relationship. Then we got into third and fourth year students doing case studies and stuff like that, and they said, how do you assess group projects? I said, individually. I said, I'm from the Top Chef School of Assessment when it comes to this kind of stuff. So what do you mean? I said, well, you ever watch Top Chef? Sometimes they have all these chefs competing for the one to be the top chef, but they put them into groups to prepare meals, and then they assess them, and then Tom Cleek will go, group one, or team one, goes, who cooked the halibut? And somebody will always say, goes, oh, we all did. We're in a group. We all did. No. He goes, who cooked the halibut? Person goes, I did. He goes, it was overcooked. So what I do, I know what I do in my assessments, group project, everything, sit down, dialogue. I have a co-formative assessment with a metacognitive rubric, and we talk about everything, and they show me everything that they contributed. Evidence-based. Oh, we did this, we decided that. He goes, no, what did you contribute to the conversation? Document it. What did you bring to that? What did you build that? What did you do in that social innovation for the homeless, whatever? What did you do for that piece right there? What was your piece in it? What did you say? You know what? I get to know them really well, but it's not adversarial like that, by the way. It's not adversarial. I'm in a dialogic relationship with them as a collaborator. But you know what? I get to know where they are, where their weaknesses are. I can now design the whole learning experience environment around them, their development. So here's what I say to my students when they come in. I'm here to help you develop, not to measure you. I'm here for development. What a difference that is for them. Oh, you mean, oh, I'm on their side of the fence now. You see? I show you the evaluations they get from the courses and that. You can see how they perceive it. How they perceive it. And they go, oh, all of a sudden now, now they have to trust me. If they don't trust you, if you're the measurer or whatever, even though you're an expert or whatever, okay? Literally complex, we'll go through that. Oh, here's the one. So this is interesting. We got to go. This is Sharma stuff. Some of you know this stuff. Egocentric to ecocentric. It's a classic thing of defining whether somebody is collaborative or not by how they communicate, by really qualitatively looking at their interactivity and what kind of activity they're doing with others. And I'll just go. And then the whole notion of pedagogy to sociagogy. Pedagogy, leading children, to sociagogy, teaching each other. It's a very different transition in a networked world. Very, very different. And these experts are all over the place that I can access. My students are going, well, I don't want to contact so-and-so. What are they going to say? Well, what's the worst thing they can say? Say no to you. What's the best thing that could happen? You have an expert who's going to advance your idea and your prototype and your concept down, right? That kind of stuff, right? So sociagogy is an interest, and institution to institution, which is, I think, characterizes some of the stuff that you do here, where people, I don't have to go to 4 years to take a degree at a large liberal arts institution. I mean, read Kevin Carey, The End of College, 2015, to talk about the end of large liberal arts institutions. I mean, they're dated. The culture's changed. So these are the dynamics that are behind all this change. And if we don't adapt, so here's the 3 principles that I have in my 2016 book that I think inform a lot of this culture on the bottom. The principle of infinite potentials. Think about this. So creativity, who wrote 98, what's his name? Ideation, idea generation is the indispensable core of creativity. Well, it's half of it. You have to get to the currency that you're working in to experiment. It's highly generative or whatever. And I'll show you my creative development model right after this one. Okay? So infinite potentials, ideas. The more ideas we have, the greater potential you have for fusion and hybridization and for an innovative kind of creative outcome, a novel outcome, right? And our problem with the right answer syndrome with outcomes known is our culture is subject to early closure. Have you ever had students who close down a concept early? They shut it down. That's what they've been socialized into. And they won't trust a process unless they have engaged in the process longitudinally over time, okay? And we won't know that process as individuals unless we engage in that process over time ourselves and get a first-hand view of what it's like to engage in ideation collaboratively with an incredible input of ideas from expert resources and whatever research, active research, investigative research, okay? And then prototyping, trying my ideas out in the currency of the discipline, and then refining it, and ideation, and this constant divergent, convergent pulse over time, right? But where do ideas come from? People. Well, an idea can move into something an infinite number of iterations. Well, I should have a fundamental belief that anybody who walks through my door has infinite potentials. Think about it. You show it mathematically. But you think about a closed system that's based on consumption, isn't about that. It's not a system about infinite potentials. All my students have infinite potentials. No, we segregate them right off the bat. And then the social evaluation peels a whole pile of them off when they're totally normal people with incredible potential to create or innovate for the benefit of others. Number 2, the principle of interrelatedness. You know, I use the word ecology a lot in education now when I do all my grad stuff or whatever, a belief that every inorganic entity is interrelated, connected. The term unnatural is just a ridiculous term. I said yesterday in our session, if I'm a chimpanzee and I take a twig and I shove it into a termite mound and then I pull it out and I lick the termites off the stick, I'm an example of a primate using a tool. But if I'm a worker in a Ford Canada plant in Ontario or wherever, I'm what? I'm doing something inorganic because we're using robotics or whatever. No. Where's the separation? I'm using tools, I'm whatever. So they're more sophisticated, they're refined or whatever. It's all the same continuum. Where did that separation come? I understand we separate it scientifically, all that kind of stuff. But the fact that we have that lack of interrelationship, that highly segregated discipline silos, that mistrust, all that commodification of knowledge, doesn't do us any good. It's got to be the exact opposite. So if we understand the ecology of the interrelationships is essential to leveraging the potentials of collaborative creativity, that we're totally interrelated, right? And then the principle of perpetual change. What does education exist for? That's why I ask you, are you an agent of change? What does it exist for? I think education exists to equip learners and educators to deal with perpetual change and to create positive perpetual change. How does passive consumption gives a knowledge, we need a knowledge base for that, but that's only part of the answer. It's a small part of the answer of dispositional development, okay? So now let's look at attributes of collaborative creativity. Here's the descriptors I would use. I would say cooperation is just clearly two or more people completing a task together. At its very basic. And then I would differentiate collaboration from that with these attributes. The group exists for creating something new or novel, because I've got the word creativity coupled with it, okay? The diverse strengths of group members are leveraged to maximize creative outcomes. Absolutely. If you do not do that, I don't think you really have a great collaborative environment where one person's driving it all the time, right? It doesn't mean you don't have a queen bee in a collaborative environment. That's important. It's just everybody's got to be leveraged. There's a shared vision, understanding, and purpose eventually. Group members have shifted, this is a big one, egocentric to group-centric. You probably have been in meetings of committees and any number of things, work, here, anywhere, where you had these wondrous goals for this committee that was going to design these really neat things, and then somebody in that group was there really to protect their turf, or to another agenda, or to subvert or whatever. And you can tell, were they group-centric or were they egocentric? And if you don't make that transition, I look at my own students, I know when they made the move and when they haven't. That they'll subvert, or there'll be anxiety issues, there'll be all kinds of stuff to deal with them as learners, right? And then we look at this is the key one, number 5, there's a high degree of interactivity with communication characterized by you see, read it there, open-mindedness, flexibility, active and deep listening, respect, honesty, whatever. Peter Glur's stuff, 6 signs of truly collaborative culture, honest feedback, okay? And really the culture kind of grows from a safe culture where I feel safe enough to give my opinion, and I use plussing a lot. Randy Nelson's idea of plussing, or yes and, read the book, The Second City People, or whatever. So any ideas that people have, the only thing we're allowed to do is add to them. And after they get trust, then they become more honest. You don't really have to be negative to be honest, but I trust that you're not going to hurt me, and we're really dealing with the project we're dealing with. There's a transition that goes. And the 4 levels of listening, I mean, I'm looking for how they're communicating. 1 is attentive. It's their body language. Are they giving me a physical presence that they're listening to me? Number 2 is interpretive, where I'm asking for clarification. Oh, you mean this? Or I'm paraphrasing you to make sure I understand you. Number 3 is empathetical, where now I'm really understanding, a deeper understanding of you, because now I'm bringing the emotional side. I can emphasize with your position and where you've been and all that, how you arrived at this. And the last one is generative. Now we're in a conversation where we are now building ideas. And those 4 stages in the listening side are really great instruments for assessing or measuring collaborative development. It's the nature of the communication between participants in a group and level of sophistication. And it'll really help you gauge potentials for creative potentials for these people. So last one, the collaborative creative outcomes are usually not possible or extremely difficult done by the individual. Something you usually couldn't do by yourself. Okay? Now, here's my creative development schematic. Are we all creative? Yes. By nature, we're intuitive adaptive creativity. Now, here's a question I always ask a lot of people. How many here have never lied? Never lied, or told a fib? We'll use that. How many have never lied ever? Put your hand up. No one? Okay, how many here, okay, let's do it differently. How many of you are compulsive liars but don't want anybody to know? Put your hand up. Okay. You ever look little kids just fib about it? You know what I mean? I didn't do it. I didn't touch it. This is make stuff up, right? And anyways, well, we adapt. We're very adaptive. Watch a 3-year-old play, 4-year-old play. They're inventing constantly and adapting. Probably when we cook at night, when we dress, we're adapting, all mixing it and stuff like that, or improvising, or you're in a situation you had to improvise to get out of something or whatever, and that kind of stuff. So we have that disposition. Do we build it? Does it grow to a point where at the top we engage in sustained creative practice, original research and production, sustained over time, where I can work collaboratively at a high level for a long period of time through recurrent iterations of ideation and prototyping over time? Look at the sophisticated issues we have to deal with today and how many people, inputs it would take to solve that kind of stuff. And it takes a lot of sustain. So, I've got 8 developmental kind of attributes. The foundational one is collaborative and communicative development. And I would say number one, you see the pedagogical or sociological model I use has established culture right off the bat. If you don't have that collaborative culture, your innovative trajectory is way lower. Why? Because what you'll have is probably less potentials for interactivity. Interactivity is idea generation. Hyper idea generation, hyper stimuli, usually means greater potential outcomes at the end. Now you can get too much and get paradox of choice, but that's for another time. I've done a lot of work on idea generation over time and that, but we'll save that. So I'm thinking that here are the 8 developmental strands. Now look where I've got discipline, complexity, development, and critical analytical thinking, like they're partners. You cannot grow creative capacity without knowing more about the area you're working in. Okay? Chemistry, pick an area. Engineering, pick it. The more I know about that area, the more I know about the subtleties and nuances to create and that kind of stuff. But a young learner, a kindergarten kid, has a base knowledge about something. They can create correspondingly commensurate to that level. You know, so those things are possible. Our problem is we don't give people, we should be getting undergraduate students who have a high creative capacity. Can you imagine if you got students that had a high creative capacity and you took them and went further, what you'd be capable of at a post-secondary institution? Or if you were a student coming into that environment, what you'd be doing. Be pretty interesting, potentially. So I think self-instigated development, moving a student from extrinsically motivated to intrinsically motivated. Research investigative development, becoming from a passive researcher to being investigative, to initiating. Okay, highly dialogic research, interviewing, conversationally with experts, that kind of thing. Generative development, ideation. A lot of people have good ideas, but they never bring them to form. You ever have students like that? They have great ideas, but when it goes to prototyping, they'll crash. So that's why I've separated these. Experimentational development would be in the currency. I always want to write a book. I want to write a novel. There's great ideas for a novel. Start writing. You're going to have to start writing eventually to get some traction. In fact, the earlier you go to prototyping, the higher your generative potentials are. Keith Sawyer. Okay? And then I've got discipline complexity. So instead of the system existing for discipline complexity development, it's existing for creating, and that's the context for discipline complexity. Now I have a reason to learn about the nuances of chemistry and whatever discipline it is that I'm playing around in, right? If I bring that to it. So that relationship is always a tricky one. And like I'm saying, don't get me wrong, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You need disciplined chops to get up there. Critical analytical thinking, when I'm generating alternatives for problem resolution, I better be able to analyze. I'd be able to analyze the knowledge I'm bringing in, analyze and compare alternatives, all that kind of stuff, right? Then finally, and then there's that on the sidebar on the right, as the student gains creative capacity is a level of sophistication that one can engage in creative practice. And it goes from relative to myself to relative to the field as my work gains in sophistication. So I'm a creative writer. I write a story in grade 3. Then I write my first novel in high school. And then I write a novel, maybe late high school, that's a teen novel that maybe gets some interest from a publisher. Now it becomes relevant to the field, okay? Being judged by critics or whatever. Here's my hunch. This is not empirical data. This is just me reviewing course outlines from grad students from where they worked in their schools and stuff like that, just to see where the emphasis is on education. Notice I have discipline competency. There's always a high expectation all the way up, that you know your subject chops, okay? Facts and content and stuff like that, right? Creative development, however, it goes really high as a preschooler. Watch a preschooler, that's all they do. They play and experiment and stuff like that. And as we get into higher secondary school, we get into post-secondary admission standards. I need my GPA to get into university. Now we get into content-laden stuff, right? And then what happens, undergraduate stuff, often big lectures. This is not empirical data, just observations from outlines and stuff like that. And then guess what? Graduate students, okay, be creative. We want you to come up with a thesis and do an original kernel of knowledge. Meanwhile, for years before that, they haven't had much practice in creative culture and generating original work. I tried to present this to Alberta Education in way more detail. I said, you realize we could have students in grade 12? I had a colleague who was the head of chemistry department at U of C, who's now the dean of science at Ryerson. David Cram had undergraduate students as lead writers on research papers. Undergraduate students, which you should be. I said, just think, David, we can get younger students with this kind of empowerment or disposition coming in, it would be we can get it lower. And have people creating original research all the way up, relative to themselves, and then eventually relative to the field on a continuum. But instead, they come in and we have this expectation of them, okay? Now, here's what I think that the way the culture sort of goes, right? Learning experience design, and as educators, we have a mutable role. Not sage on the stage like I'm doing right now. It's really facilitator, collaborator, mentor, and a continuum. So you're looking at a developmental continuum. It might not be in a course. It might be over a program, right? So don't get me wrong. You might have to have a course that's really about chops. You know what I mean? Because I have to have that in order to be able to create and do whatever. So it could be over a continuum or whatever, but it's a developmental sequence. But you know what the end game is? Student-initiated invention. Student-initiated invention. And it would be nice to have faculty-initiated invention, that there's a space for that, where you invent, right? And make those spaces. And some of you do that, some of you, it depends where you are, what institution you're at or whatever. But number one is, you establish and maintain the collaborative culture, those 6 attributes I had under collaborative creativity, your potentials for innovation go up exponentially. Because of the interactivity, statusless culture, hyper-stimuli environments, all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of attributes and data on that. They can show that, okay? And then now let's look at assessment. We'll close on this one. This is always the big one, right? This is the big one. How do we grade people? How do I get graded? If you're gonna have a problem as a student or as an educator, it'll be on assessment with a student, right? They'll bite your head off. Student will bite your head off. They're being judged. They're being measured. And rightly so, because you're defensive and it becomes personal or whatever. And the trick is this. If you go to collaborative creativity, if you move the culture that way, and you realize that now my educators who have paid a tuition fee to have all these experts in the room, they're here to help me develop. So I have to have an assessment system that's commensurate with that, that's developmental. Okay, so we can go to summative assessments to do a quick checklist of, do you know these facts? Do I really have to do that? Do I really have to do that? My son he's in finance at Suncor, and he said, I was going to do my, CFA, what was it? He says, it's all rote learning. It's rote learning. I got to go through this rote thing. It's got this failure rate. He says, what do you think? I said, don't even ask me, Patrick. I said, you're in a corporation. You could be working in that environment with people that know this stuff on the job, in context, and whatever. They could be so much more meaningful way of doing this than the way they're doing that organization's done that. Anyway, so I said, but don't let me influence you, okay? So, but I thought, okay, those organizations do things that way. They're about standardization, right? That's how we know you've got these whatever. So I'm thinking, assessment of learning, okay, summative. Then we get assessment for learning. I assess that'll help me with instructional design going forward, that kind of stuff, right? But I have to look at number 3, assessment as learning, developmental. Now you're gonna go, how do I come up with a quantitative measure and still have assessment as learning where it's developmental and be dialogic? How can I be on the same side of the fence as a student and still assess them? Well, I think they should co-own the assessment, but not for the grade, for the development part. You see, they should know. Now so what I do with my design students, with my graduate students, they have booklets of these, and again, metacognitive rubrics, and I don't have enough time to share it here, but they write reams and reflect on what they actually did. That's that evidence-based stuff, and they provide the evidence, whatever. And so they actually almost like an essay they have to write, but it's just proof documentation of what they did. And then I sit down and I talk with them. And then I'll talk with them, go back and forth. I'll tell you at the end of that, I know whether they know the stuff, number one. And when I said another university doing this, and they said, how do you know they're not going to cheat in that environment? I said, well, you're the expert. You're the expert in the field. You mean tell me you can't pick a phony up somebody who's trying to BS you in your field? Yeah, you should know enough about it that they won't be able to pull a fast one on you, right? Or whatever, unless they're really good at it. Good con artists, and I would give them a good mark if they're that good at it. You know, I would reward that. It's innovative or whatever. So I use a metacognitive co-formative rubric where I want them to be able to look at, and I give them the attributes, whether it's collaborative development attributes, creative development attributes with those 8 developmental strands, and I have a kind of a checklist kind of thing, and we discuss it. So they locate themselves developmentally. They locate themselves, and I'll talk about it, and then I'll design stuff around them. And then I'll design, goes, here's where I want you to go from here. Now I know where they're at, what their perception is, and then they walk around, and you know what, I have a student too, when I talk with them, I said, no one leaves here unless you're satisfied that you've been graded fairly. You see? And you think that they'd come in going, I want an A. I have a couple students do that, undergrads. They come in first day, goes, I'm an A student. I'd like an A. I want an A in this course. I look at them, I go, you know where you belong? On Wheel of Fortune. Because you can buy any vowel you want there, okay? But show me what you've done. What have you done? You know, they come in with that expectation, a sense of entitlement. I said, no, I need evidence from you, what you've done. I'm not going to give you a test where I assess you. I'm going to give you provide me with the evidence that you understand this stuff. We're going to talk about it, then I'm going to design the way forward for you. I can personalize your learning, and I know your nuances. I know why you're having trouble with your group, and now I can deal with that and all that kind of stuff, right? And then, like I say, I got my last bank of assessments from last year. Every one was most fairest assessment I've ever received at a university. Fairest. Not all grades are high. So when I say, you know what, you really didn't get anywhere here, but here's where you have to go, they get it because it's them telling me. But if they don't know that, what's the purpose of the assessment? What's the purpose of it? Oh, you gave me a C. Well, what do you want? I said, I gave the Fraser Institute 2009. You know, they do the annual school report card. You know, they do the achievement test, they grade schools. So I wrote the rebuttal op-ed in the Calgary paper in 2009. And I said, I called it relevant A+. But I ended it. I thought any organization that just goes to provincial achievement results as an indicator of educational quality deserves an F on their report card. And I said, on second thought, it's probably too harsh of an assessment for them because I think they failed really well, so I think they deserve an F+. F+. I haven't been invited to any of their Christmas parties since then. So we have to think about, what are we here for, okay? What's happening in the culture, and the key thing, I think, going forward is reframing and resocializing. That means each of us in the room has to think about what's informed me, the way I see things in education. As a learner, as an educator, in my discipline. Why am I doing things this way? What do I want people in my trust, students coming through the door, what do students, as students, what do I want to grow and develop coming through the door? What do I want to do this? And if it's to be a passive consumer, I mean, really? Now, I like consuming data and stuff like that. I'm doing it all the time. A lot of us do that all the time. But what are we here for? So what are you here for as an educator? What do you do? What are you here for as a learner? Are you here to be empowered? Or are you here just to consume more data? So that, and the backdrop of social, cultural, economic, technological change is so rapid. And if we don't move these institutions and our ways, like all those transitional kind of dynamics, start considering some of these things as we move forward, and I think the key overall message is we've got to move from, we definitely need discipline, competency, whatever, but how do we bring in the dispositional development? Somebody who can function in a culture of collaborative creativity, who can initiate, who can imagine, and who can do all of that socially for the benefit of others. And I think that's the way forward. I really do. And systems are so slow to change. And you know what the best thing is? You never ask for permission. You just go ahead and experiment in your area and do it. And you know what? There's nothing better than a student who's satisfied, who's happy, because they're empowered, because you enable them. for the right reasons. Now, they might be happy, well, I got an A in your course, therefore I did a good job. I wouldn't want a student saying that to me. I want to say, I really liked this course because here's what I'm now able to do. I want them to talk to me in real terms about their functionality, not about an extrinsically generated symbol that a system requires. Hey, we're experts here. Experts, I want to talk to the expert. I want the expert to mentor me and help me develop. I want them to be on my side, not measure me. I want to trust that man. I want to trust that expert. And if I don't trust the expert, then I'm not going anywhere. Okay? Anyways, I'm going to end right there. I don't have any jokes or riddles or whatever. Do we have any questions at all? And here's the last panel. Here's some of the book stuff. The 2008, 2012, creative development's a key one, 2016. And this is the new one coming out right here. And these next three are just educator workbooks that go with it. They come out. We're working on those in the fall. And then I'm doing neo-learning. That's my next book. I'll start that in the fall. That's where I go all over the planet looking for institutions that are on the frontier of creativity. And some of my favorite ones, Chaos Pilots in Aarhus, Denmark. Love them. Christopher Lazelius, the head of that school, he's in my new book. He's a feature in my new book. One that's emerging that's kind of interesting right now, the Claremont Colleges in San Bernardino. Fred Lecter, he's the head of the Hive, the Sontag Center for Collaborative Creativity. It's an interesting experiment. Fred's in my in a feature in the new book as well. I have Ann Saveri, who's in a feature. She's on sociogogy. I've got Prakash Nair, interesting guy. He's a CEO of Fielding Nair International Architect. Now, Prakash Nair in his earliest career was in charge of renewing, renovating New York public schools. He got tired of just refitting them back to a dated model that he calls cells and bells. I reviewed his 2014 book for Columbia University's Teachers College record in 2016. That's where I met him. And he's got a new book called Learning by Design. And his firm goes all over the place for post-secondaries and public institutions and redesign spaces for student-centered kind of collaborative kind of learning. His problem, we were talking to him the other day, he says, we do all this wondrous stuff. They ask for all this wondrous redesign, and we go back 6 months later, and they've defaulted back to old practices. The inertia of standardization, skew effect. That's what they know. I said, well, you need to go with your firm and have somebody who's going to change their culture for a couple of years as part of your package because they don't know how to use it. Have you seen that come and go? Open concepts in school and stuff like that, right? Where you see all these things come and go and they come and they get So Reed Leonard Wax, 2014, Education 2.0. He says we have these transformative waves come through education and they get chewed up and spit out by the machine bureaucracy and they lose their most transformative properties. And you know what really has to happen? I think we need a space for adhocracies. Email me, rkelly@ucalgary.ca. No, thank you for being a good audience.